Thanks for continuing on with us. My name is Ibrahim Sani, taking over from my colleague Nina Rosman. There's plenty of items to be covered this morning. Of course, one big item that needs to be looked at is, of course, the GDP growth. A news report has come out showing that GDP growth is likely to be weaker at around 4.1% based on the items of weakening external environment for this year. Here to unpack all of this is Lee Heng Gee, a good friend of mine from the years before I joined broadcast. Heng Gee is, of course, the Executive Director of SERC, or Socio-Economic Research Centre. Heng Gee, let's talk a little bit more about this whole idea of GDP growth seeing a weaker rate at about 4.1% from previous quarters and previous years. Is this a good item for Malaysia, considering that inflation rate is seen to be very high or growing or increasing for this year?
Good morning, Ibrahim. Nice to see you. I think based on my latest assessment of all the indicators coming from external side and also local environment, we project the economy 4.1% this year compared to estimated of 8.5% last year. I think basically we are seeing the interplay of weaker external environment and domestic pressure, challenges. We hope that the new government will give us more clarity on the macro and micro narrative. But partly also we have a high base effect from last year. That's the reason why we come to a conclusion. I think Malaysian economy will normalize. I would say it's a reset and at the same time we see a lower growth compared to last year, and globally we are seeing that happening, not just advanced economy and also the some of the emerging country. I think the risk that we are seeing is the global recession risk, in particular in the advanced economy like US, Europe, and China. The reopening of China is timely. It will give some stabilizer to the global economy, but given the rising case loads in China now, we think it will be a cautious start for China, and China growth will likely to improve in the second half, and that will be positive for regional economy, for global economy in particular, in terms of the expansion of demand, and also what we hope for is a stronger improvement in the domestic tourism, likely to come from the Chinese tourist arrival. That will help us. But on the inflation side, globally, the inflation reading are coming off, but I think the pressure is still there. We still see prices like commodity, energy, they are still, even though they have come out from the high, but at this level, it still have some pressure on the economy. And likely for Malaysia, headline inflation reading for Malaysia has off the peak, and I project Malaysia inflation for this year will be around 2.8 to 3.3%. Coming from the last year estimated 3.5, but we have to watch out for potential changes in the domestic policy regards to the fuel subsidy rationalization. Then that could spur some inflation pressure on the headline and also the core inflation. I think the focus for this year for the new government is about how to mitigate the impact of inflation and rising cost of living pressure on the middle income and the E40 household.
So we've seen this government being in action for 1.5 months now, approaching 2 months. Are you happy with the kind of progress that this government is doing, particularly in the context of cost of living ministry and of course economy ministry and finance ministry?
I think it's too early to give a judgment call on this. But I think from the action so far, within the 1 month, we saw the priority has been right. I think the immediate priorities, as I mentioned, to address the economic issues like cost of living, inflation for the household, and also they try to also manage the cost pressure for the SME and the small company. So I think you can see the ministry concern had activated the cost of living committee, and they were given some timeline to come out some immediate relief measures. I think I did a study based on across the other governments around the world. The short-term measures to relieve the inflation and cost of living is like outright subsidy, cash handout, or you do some freezing of exports, or allow some importations of goods to meet your demand. Yeah, this is very short-term gap measures. I think we also have to look at the medium and long term. And like, for example, in the case of food, we know that we highly depend on imported food. I think it's time for us to seriously look at how to increase the supply of food via, in terms of the land. I think the land issue is matter a lot to a lot of small farmer, because if you want people to invest in agriculture, food production, you must give them certainty in terms of tenure of the land. You cannot be just 1 year, 2 years. It should be at least 10 years, 30 years, so that we can put some infrastructure, invest. Then only I will be committed to increase food production. There's one aspect. The other thing, we have to look into the supply chain, the logistic, how to reduce the cost of production for food. I think food is not just about fertilizer, but also there's a land cost, infrastructure, and some form of incentive or financial assistance program. And the other thing is about the supply delivery channel from the producer, the farmer, to the middleman, and the middleman back to the consumer like us. I think there is something that we need to further streamline. We must have a very consolidated type of supply chain management, which we know which area they are short of certain supply, and then we can immediately send the things to meet the demand. So these are part and parcels of the medium and long term. And the other thing is about cost of living issue, pressure. So how do you ease their problem? It's not just by merely increase their pay through minimum wages, but without improvement in productivity, that will also lead to higher costs, and the business will eventually pass to us, consumer. So I think we need to think about how to empower them, how to improve their employability, how to upskill and reskilling the employees so that they can find a better job, a better income. So there's a lot of things that we cannot just depend on the government, but also we as a consumer must work together. I totally agree with Rafizi. It's about the collaboration between the public, private, and also everyone come in together to manage the impact of this inflation and also rising cost of living pressure.
Yeah, you alluded to the Council on Cost of Living. So the National Action Council on Cost of Living, or NACCOL, has proposed the price control policy and chicken subsidies to be continued until the policy relating to the targeted mechanism is finalized. There is another recommendation put forward, that is to review the two-tier pricing mechanism, which involved about 1.6% of the total production of the crude palm oil for bottled packaging and 8.4% for packet palm oil. Things like this, I'm sure it's important for us to take a look into the subsidy element of it, but generally speaking, Hengi, do you feel that more policies like this is important to be done, or less government intervention is needed? Which one is it?
Okay, I think at this moment, as I said, immediate priority, because you want to make sure the low income, the B40 will be somewhat partially mitigated. So the government will just roll out this short-term gap measures like price control, ceiling, subsidy to the producer, subsidy to the consumer. But on a long-term basis, you can't, because you look at the total subsidy bill of the country based on the last original budget proposal, it's about 42.8 billion. It's still a big sum, of which a big chunk is going to fuel subsidy. I think what we saw now, we hope the government will have to think through what is the right mechanism in terms of subsidy rationalization. I mean, definitely we need to move from blanket to targeted. So even when we want to move to blanket at this moment where price pressure is still building up, so you want to be gradual, a mechanism will allow you to move gradually to what you call a more targeted, at the same time moving towards more market mechanism. You cannot totally free up the price, market now, because the market pricing, because currently the price pressure is still building up. So that could have even a bigger impact on all segments of the society, and that would put more pressure on the government to think what would the best. So we hope that before they come out all this two-tier pricing or targeted subsidy on fuel or on other stuff, maybe they can have more engagement with the stakeholders. Yeah, I think it's important to get the producer come in I think they are doing something now. They know what's the cost of produce an egg, the chicken, so that they will know whether are they along the way, is there any excessive profit sharing. Yeah. So at the same time, then you can come up mechanism for what is the right price for us to subsidize temporarily while waiting to come out a more comprehensive mechanism to address this subsidy issues. Yeah.
Okay. So budget 2023 is going to be presented on February 24th. Do you feel that the government may aim for a lower deficit here? Also, do you think that the government is going to float the idea of, say, for instance, GST, widening tax base, and other form of income for the government?
There's a lot of expectation on the coming retabling of budget. I think based on the mini budget that was tabled earlier on, we saw it's already about 107.7 billion for temporary OE, operating expenditure, and about 56 billion is for the important urgent development expenditure. I think that total already make up 40% of the original budget that was tabled by the previous Minister of Finance. So I think the whole thrust of the budget, this budget will still be on managing a prudent fiscal deficit. I think they want to control deficit below the 6%, and I'm hoping a tall order for the new government, a deficit between 4.5 to 5% of GDP compared to the original budget deficit about 5.8%. So it's a tall order, which means that they will have to relook at some of the expenditure, whether during this year, do they want to spend on project which they think maybe they have no difficult to implement. But the DE is the one that they may have to review a bit. I think DE for the original budget is 95 billion, of which I think about 4 billion US is for the service of 1 MDB bond redemption. So I think they have to do some fine-tuning on the DE, because you know why? Some of the additional subsidy, given that they may go slow on implementing what called targeted, so some resources have to channel more to the subsidy. For example, like in the electricity tariff, recently they announced that they are not going to raise the tariff for the SME, for household, and the agriculture industry, only for the MNC and some large industry. That cost them about 10.8 billion electricity tariff. So that could be a precursor for the government to gradually implement what we call a targeted fuel subsidy. So we shall see whether everything can happen by the first quarter or even before the tabling of the new budget. And on a GST, actually, for me, originally, when before the former Prime Minister of Finance tabled the budget, I was hoping that in the 2023 budget speech, they would touch on GST, that give us about 1 year time, 1 year time for us to get ready and implement on the 1st January of 2024. Yeah, so we don't know whether this budget speech will touch something along the line, because from the chamber perspective, we do a survey among the business community, Chinese community. I think most of them support for GST. But what they hope is that give us a 6 to 12 months time for us to get make ready for GST implementation, and hopefully they can start with a low rate, around the 4%, rather than start with a high rate. Yeah.
Okay. Also, CERC has forecasted Bank Negara Malaysia to raise its OPR rate by an additional 50 basis points. It's worth noting that this is a little bit higher than consensus. Maybank thinks it's 25 basis points. AHAM Capital 25 basis points, RHB 25 basis points. What are the thinking that is going in on CERC, thinking that there will be tightening further of monetary policy by 50 basis points?
Okay, my 50 basis point is 2 rounds. It's not just one, 2 in 2 times. So every time is 25 basis point. So I think why I think the OPR may go for at least 1 to 2, basically based on the fact that economy is still growing, even though it's lower compared to last year because of the base effect. Inflation risk is still high, yeah. And I think 3.25 is a level which is prior to the pandemic, yeah. So we just normalize it. Overall, the conditions, the liquidity condition is not significant tighten, and I'm sure the banks will continue to support those sectors that likely to help the continue to grow. I mean, there's a lot of investment opportunity now with the more certain political environment. So we hope that that will spur some business loan. I think consumer side, there could be some adjustment. I think they have pent-up demand likely to normalize. So I think when central bank is going to raise it by when it one time or two times, at this 3.25% or 3% level is still, to me, is still supportive. I don't think it's very restrictive as compared to other countries like, Fed, which is even higher and more aggressive. But generally this year, we think the economic conditions should allow the central bank to still moving gradually. And I understand people out there is that they are having the impact of inflation, cost of living pressure, and one of the reasons they are worried is that whether interest rate will continue to rise, that will also impact on their ability to service their loan. Talking about those who have high high borrowing costs, that could also impact them. But I think basically the whole thing about monetary policy is you have to rebuild some buffer when things are you are already off the worst of the worst. I mean, the pandemic is over. People are now all back to normal. Yes, we are seeing growth slower because you have the external environment, things are normalized, but that doesn't mean that central bank will not balancing the risk of inflation versus the growth. So if you feel the growth is likely to slow down more, then they may slow the pace of the interest rate increase. Something similar like the FOMC, which the market expect them to be slower in the rate increases compared to last year. Yeah, Sunny?
Okay, final question, Hengi. The risks that needs to be thought of for this year. You mentioned inflationary cost, COVID reopening. What will be some of the risks that you think needs to be discussed or thought of for the rest of the year?
Okay, I think on the global side, what I'm projecting is a mild recession, in particular in US and Europe. So if it's a deep recession, then the shock will be very significant to Malaysia. Being a small economy, external economy, your shock will come from external side and your financial side, right? So one. Secondly is what we you just mentioned, inflationary pressure and cost of living. So if we can have measures, short-term measures to mitigate the impact, at least the consumer don't feel so pinched in terms of their spending power. Already, hopefully that increment for this year will be slightly better. I think based on average is about 4 to 5%. That also partially cover whatever your headline inflation numbers are. So the third one is the shock coming from ongoing, military conflict in Ukraine. Hopefully, it will not escalate further. And I think we have to watch closely on China reopening, which is already started. And we hope that, my view is that second half or second quarter, I think first quarter things will start to peak, whatever cases in China. So people will sentiment will improve, then going to better and better in the second half. But whether China will surprise the world, give you even stronger than what their official target 5%, I think China also gone through a period of strong growth. Now they are going through a period of consolidation. I think whatever focus now from China, they will have to deal with the usual technology conflict with US. So that's another area which Malaysia will can benefit in terms of all this technology conflict where relocations of investment. So I think this year also a year for us to reset and also start to think, what are the investment, what type of investment, and when China reopening, we can further capitalize on this and reset back our very enhanced and strong relationship between Malaysia and China. Not just about ECIL, not just about what I call tourism, but also areas that we want them to help us to come in, like in the areas of digital, e-commerce, green investment, renewable energy, even like for the SME, your AI, robotics. So there's a lot of plentiful type of potential that we can work with China now with the economy is fully reopened now.
Fantastic, Hengi. Thank you for joining us this morning. That was Lee Hengi, the Executive Director of the Socio-Economic Research Centre. Have a good year.